The Mishnah Pirkei Avos, where it says "Siog l'shtika chochma," that offense, if one wants to preserve his wisdom and maximize it, it's silence. See, he says something phenomenal. Siog l'chochma shtika, lefichol, therefore, lo yimayer, lo hoshiv, lo yaber l'daber. When you hear something, don't respond immediately. Meaning, you have a difficulty, you have questions posed to you, think for a moment. It should not be with immediacy respond. Remain silent. And even when you speak, you should speak more succinctly, more specifically. Now, to respond immediately, because maybe what you're going to say may not be correct or accurate. The Rabbeinu Yonah writes in Pirkei Avos that very often he writes this in the first chapter. Even if you're brilliant, the first thing that comes to mind initially seems to be correct, but as you think about it, you begin seeing there's certain fallacies, or it's not as perfect as you thought it was. But when you continuously reflect on it, then you refine it, and then you come to the conclusion, to the right understanding. Therefore, siyog l'chochma shtika. What is chochma? You've come upon certain understandings and insights. Therefore, remain silent. Restrain yourself. Don't respond immediately. Of course, the initial response will be maybe intelligent, but it will not be the answer or give you the correct understanding. By remaining silent and suppressing that response, you're going to deliberate and reflect on what you're going to say, and therefore what comes out you'll come upon a true understanding. Therefore, you shouldn't respond immediately. Then he said, even when you speak, you should not speak too much. It should be more succinct. Now, to be able to speak succinctly and concisely, you have to think before you're going to speak. What exactly am I going to say? How should I word this? How should I say it? The example I always give, person goes on an interview, and the interviewer asks you a question. Before you respond, understanding the ramifications of your answer, whether you're going to get the job or not get the job, and you want to impress that interviewer, you hear the question, you're going to wait to answer, and even if you wait to answer, you're going to be very careful how to word whatever that is, even if it's a correct answer. Because that interviewer is a person who has the ability to evaluate you based on how you say it, what you say. Even what you say is correct. But if you say it, you use too many words, and you're not as clear, although what you're saying is correct, you don't have the level of clarity or astuteness that they're looking for. So to be more astute, it's not only don't respond immediately to fully understand what you're saying is correct, but even when you say it, it should be said, don't say it with too many words. Say exact what has to be said, not more, not less. And that's chokhmah. Because firstly, you come upon the wisdom, and even when you do, if you speak too much, even to yourself, it's not clear enough. It's not concise enough. It's not sufficiently succinct. Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, he had a level of understanding beyond our comprehension. He was able to, his level of analysis, with a glance, he was able to understand exactly how to deal with an issue immediately. And he understood the way people thought, and through the thought pattern, he understood exactly how a person would behave in a certain situation. So somebody comes to Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and he presents a piece of Torah to him. And Rav Chaim Soloveitchik says, I don't really understand what you're saying. So the person says to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, I know what I'm saying, but I can't express it clearly. That's what he said to him. I can't articulate it clearly, but I know what I'm saying. So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik said to him, If you would understand it clearly, you'd express it clearly. That you're not articulating it in a clear manner, that means you yourself in your own mind don't have it sufficiently clear. The way you express it, that tells exactly how you grasp and what degree of clarity you have regarding that issue. So as a result of that, even in your mind, sometimes when you speak, it clarifies itself. When you express it, it becomes more clear. So if you express it in where you speak excessively, that excessive speech doesn't allow you that through the speech, through the articulation, you come to a greater level of clarity. But if you speak very concisely and you choose your words, as a result of that, the mind, the concept becomes more refined because when you express it, you're being very deliberate in the words that you're using. Very often when I teach, as I speak, sometimes things come to mind and I get another way to see it or a broader way to see it. But as I speak, before I began speaking, I didn't think about it. Although I thought about it, but as I speak, other things come to my mind. Because again, when you speak, the mind is abstract. When you speak, although speech is not tangible, but relative to what the mind is, it's tangible. It's the expression. You're bringing the abstract to a less level of abstract. As a result of that, when you speak, we say seeing is believing. That's reality. When you visual, it's reality. What's in the mind is not reality. And even when you speak until you actualize it, and the question is, what's actualization? So relative to the mind, actualizing the thought, refining the thought, that expression makes the difference. He says, therefore, you shouldn't be quick to respond. And even when you respond, it should be with a minimal amount of words. It should be more concise, because that causes you to reflect even to a greater degree. Before you articulate it, you choose your words to express even after you didn't respond immediately. That's part of the delay, so to say. And when you teach students, it should be with a level of tranquility, a calmness, not screaming, and not to speak excessively. For us, anybody, what's the whole concept of meditation? People meditate, they're able to go to a state that they're not distracted by what's around them, if they could go into that meditative state. Because when you're focused, not to be distracted, you're able to come to another level of clarity. You're able to go within yourself. If a teacher teaches with a calmness, with a tranquility, then what you listen to, it's like music. And you're communicating something of value where they could appreciate what you're communicating to them. It's like, it's an enjoyable experience. When you enjoy something, there's no bait, there's nothing, you're not distracted from what's being said to you. Let's say the teacher, the Rebbe, he screams. That screaming, there's no reason to scream. The screaming automatically, it causes a distraction, and we're distracted very easily. Because the key in life, I always say, is focus. The more focused you are, the greater chance you have to succeed. Either to see the pitfalls, to see the fallacies, if you have focus. The more focused you are, you see, is it right or is it wrong? And even if it's right, you see the shortcomings that the right is not perfectly right. And you're able to weed out the problem because you have that level of focus, which allows you to have clarity. When the Rebbe screams, that's a distraction because you feel like put upon. But if it's with a calmness and with a tranquility, it's like a pleasure to listen to it. There's a calmness. So the one who's hearing this, the recipient of that, he's fully absorbing it. And also, and when you speak to him, be very succinct. Don't elaborate. Don't overdo it. Why? Because again, if the student has to struggle to understand exactly what you're saying, it's like almost like finding a needle in a haystack. What did he exactly mean? If it's the teacher teaches very clearly, succinctly, he understands everything is pleasurable. I have no relevance to music, but if you had the masters, Beethoven, these people, they were geniuses in what they did. And if you have an appreciation of music, you're able to see the genius and appreciate that genius. And there's not one note or anything which is off as much as an iota. Everything is perfect. So the person who has an appreciation for that kind of music, you listen to it, it's like you have euphoria. You go into another state of being because you're fully overtaken by that music. L'havdil. So when you teach, if you teach with this pleasantness, with this calmness, very succinctly, concisely, where the person doesn't have to struggle, what does it mean? Because there's some excess words there. What exactly? So everything is just purely absorbing. When you're absorbing, everything's pleasurable. There's full focus. Once there's full focus, the student is a beneficiary of the full communication between the teacher and the student. That's the understanding. Besides, you teach the student himself that when he speaks, he should also speak civilly. As the teacher speaks calmly, without screaming, so there should not be distraction. Similarly, the student, he's learning exactly how to communicate concepts of wisdom. It's literally so profound. New understanding. We studied this Mishnah many times. Like we won't say, you want to fully appreciate wisdom, remain silent. So he's explained, no, even from the teacher's point of view, he's asked a question, think before you respond. Because even though the first response may be brilliant, but it may not be the right answer. But if you reflect and you contemplate, and only then you express it, then you're closer to the truth than you would be with an immediate response. And in addition, and when you do respond, choose your words. There shouldn't be anything excess. Because again, that causes you to think in your own mind, through that choosing, that articulation, it will refine your understanding of whatever that subject matter is that you have to respond to. The author of Kelm, there was a yeshiva in Kelm, was a small town in Lithuania that was founded by the student of Shos Salanter. His name was Reb Simcha Zissel Ziv, who was known as the author of Kelm. Any students, and he taught his students, when somebody speaks, any conversation, allow the person to finish speaking before you respond. Very often people have, it's a bad habit. Person starts speaking, right away you interrupt the person and you respond. First, you have to let the person fully say what he's going to say. First, out of respect. Out of respect. I mean, if it's what he's saying is foolishness, you shut him down immediately. But if he's trying to say something, and he is saying something of value, out of respect. So simply meant out of respect. Allow the man to finish speaking, and then you respond with whatever you have to say. It was much more than that, as the Rambam say now. Because unless if you interrupt and you don't allow him to finish speaking, you don't have the full impact of what he's saying or the full understanding of what he's saying. It's the same idea. By listening and not responding immediately, that allows you to reflect and contemplate what's being said. The same thing. But if you interrupt a man, you don't give yourself the time even to reflect on what's being said. So what's the answer? The answer is because you don't value what is being said, not intentionally, but that kind of interaction automatically indicates or causes the person himself not to be a beneficiary of whatever that is. There's a story of Reb Kiva Eger. Reb Kiva Eger, Rabbi Pinto says that Alan is in the center of Reb Kiva Eger. He had a sense he is. Reb Kiva Eger, the Chofetz Chaim said from the time of the Vilna Gaon to Reb Kiva Eger, there's no one as great as Reb Kiva Eger. That's how great he was in Torah. Reb Kiva Eger was so great and so humble that he himself didn't appreciate how great he was. That was his level of humility. He was so great, and he was giving a public lecture, and every moment he said another thought. Somebody asked on it. It was like under attack. And he believed that the person maybe was right because of his level of humility. Maybe he didn't say it clear enough. Maybe he's at fault. That's why the man's responding the way he's responding. Even though the fact was the man was an arrogant person. He was a person who was arrogant, and he wanted to show what he knew. It reached a point where Kiva Eger, because of his level of humility, felt maybe he's not worthy even to say this kind of lecture. Because otherwise, why would a person ask if he hardly presented what his position? Evidently, it's so off, and Reb Kiva actually became upset, became sick over it. It affected him health-wise, because he felt he's not worthy to say this kind of lecture. Oh, that had nothing to do with it. It's because this man, the way he responded, was an indication he wasn't listening. All he wanted to hear was himself, to show people what he knew. When Reb Salanta presented the concept of the Mussar movement, that people should study Mussar, meaning one's self-improvement, one has to correct his behavior, like what the Rambam speaks about, your inborn predilections, and you have to be more humble and reflect on, and you have to refine your fear of heaven, all these things. People are opposed to it. Why? Because if you spend time studying Mussar, the works which allow a person to just increase his awareness of God or his own shortcomings, what about studying Gemara, the Talmud, which is the ultimate level of truth and intellectualism? But Rabbi Salanter, his name was Rabbi Spector. He was the genius of the generation. He was the leading Torah sage of the generation. And there was no orator the way Rabbi Salanter. He had oratory skills like him. So in Vilna, there was a shul which held 1,000 people. And every Shabbos, he'd have a forum where he would get up, speak just a short period of time, then he'd allow questions. Any question you would want to ask, and he would respond publicly in the presence of these 1,000 people. Many of the Lithuanian students who were very into this brain, into the intellectualism, they felt it's a waste of time. What do I have to study this? Mussar. If you don't have a mind that you're not able to plumb the depths of the Talmud, you study Mussar. But if you have the ability to delve into the Talmud, you don't spend time on Mussar. So somebody asked him, if I study Mussar for half an hour, and during that half an hour, I'm able to study 2 folios of Gemara, should I use that half an hour for the 2 folios of Gemara, or should I study Mussar? So Rabbi Salanta answered, he says, if you study the half an hour Mussar, you're going to find another 2 hours a day to study the Gemara. Because when you understand what the value, what it means to serve God, who God is, then everything also in the Torah takes on a new dimension of value. So what you thought you had no time, all of a sudden now you realize you have time, because if the Torah is primary and you're able to internalize that reality, all of a sudden you see you have more time to study. But because you don't study Mussar and you think everything's determined by your evaluation, therefore you're limited. Therefore, the Mussar is essential to what degree you can advance yourself as a Torah scholar. That was his response. Respond. That's the question.
Rabbi, you were talking about Yisrael Salanta and Mussar. My question was, Mussar movement's only roughly 200 years old or so. Didn't they have Mussar before? Didn't they have to work on themselves before? It was just Talmud without Mussar?
Good question. Okay. Firstly, we have the Rambam in the laws of Deios and the laws of Yesodei Torah. And we had Rabbeinu Yonah Shari Tshuva, who's an early commentator. There are only 2 Mussar works that were written by the earlier commentators, by the earlier, from that early era. There is the Chovos HaLevavos, Duties of the Heart. That's a Mussar Sefer, and very profound. You have the Shari Tshuva, which is written by Rabbeinu Yonah of Grundy. He was an earlier one. We have Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, which have commentary. Rabbeinu Yonah, his commentary there, it's a Mussar work. And then you have Mishlei, if you study Proverbs, Proverbs is really the lesson of life through Proverbs. And factually, this is people think at one time people were great scholars. Let's say you study Musar, and you don't have at one time yeshivas didn't exist. The first formal yeshiva in literally hundreds of years was the Volozhina yeshiva that was established by the student of the Vilna Gaon, just historically speaking. So how did people study Torah? You lived in a town, and you had a rabbi who was a great Torah sage, and he would gather a few students, and they were his proteges. That was his inner circle. Other people, because of the level of impoverishment, by the time they were 12, they were working on the field with their fathers. Because everybody was literally below the poverty line. You didn't have any formal education. You had a mlamed who taught the child how to read and how to daven and a little chumash, and the father and the person would take out an hour a day because he didn't have any other time to study. But what did he know? Knew very little. All he knew was what the rabbi of his village or of his town would tell him how to behave. And Jews in those days, they were like very simple, not learned, but they were very pure because they were dedicated to the tradition, but knowledge they didn't have. If you study Musar, and Chofetz Chaim makes it a point, if you study tremendous amounts, but you don't study Musar, you believe that you're God's gift to humanity. When do you begin seeing the shortcomings in yourself? When you study Musar. But if you study Musar and you don't have Torah to study, you don't have a person to teach you the Torah. I want to be observant. How am I observant? You don't have the means. A person is a genius, and he could turn money into masses of great amounts of money, but you have no money to invest. You don't have investment capital. No, you can sit all day, make calculations how you could be the richest man in the world, but if you don't have investment capital, you're going nowhere. And you have no one to impress that you have that ability to increase his value. Where do you go with it? You study Musar. I have to fear God. I feel God's presence. But how do you interact with God? What do you do? So if you have no knowledge, you're going nowhere. So literally, it's like a catch-22. If you have the Torah without the Musar, you believe that you're right. And if you have the Musar without the Torah, you don't know exactly. You may feel connected to God, but how do you do God's will? Not knowing what God's will is. It's only what you believe it is, but it's not that, because you have to be learned for that. As a result of that, the handful of people who had the knowledge, they studied these works, Shari Tshuva, Rabbeinu Yonah, which were early commentators. You have the commentary on Pirkei Avos, was enough. And because they were always under the tutelage of that rabbi, he communicated them. He was like the role model of what it means to fear God, because that rabbi usually was a tzaddik, was a chosid. So that was the Musar. But once things began expanding, flourishing, and people studied without Musar, all of a sudden you're like a wild card. You have to somehow be more focused. You have to understand. Person believes he's in the center lane. He's going off the cliff. That's where he is. You may believe you're there, but you're not there. That's the reason why Rabbi Yisrael in his time, this is the time where yeshiva started. The Volozhin yeshiva was just founded at his time. That's when he felt it's the time to introduce the Musar. And he even tried to impress Rabbi Chaim Brisker that they should study Musar in Volozhin. And Rabbi Chaim Brisker originally said, Musar is like medicine. If you're not well, you take medicine. But if you're well, you don't take medicine. So in Volozhin, where they study and they're such advanced Torah scholars, they don't need it. They're healthy. But ultimately, why was Volozhin shut down by the Russian government? Because there was a fifth column in the yeshiva, because they did not study Musar. That's why it was shut down. And after it was shut down, Rav Chaim Brisker, who was a Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin, admitted that he made a mistake, that they did not implement the Musar study. That would have preserved and protected the yeshiva, that it would have continued. That's the background.
The other question.
Ask the question again, Larry. Good.
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. So you cited both the need for Torah study and to understand Musar. And my question is, for those of us that are really at the base level, are they done parallel, or is one more important than the other for the point of view of foundational growth in our understanding of Judaism?
Okay, now let's see if a person has no background in Judaism. He knows he's Jewish, that knows very little about it, and he's a smart person. He's secularly educated, and you're going to teach him Musar. You can study Musar with him. Understand, unless he's impressed with the religion, the Musar is what is to keep him on that straight, narrow path. He doesn't even know what path you're talking about. He doesn't even have an understanding what's God's value in his life. If you teach him Torah initially, I'm not saying a tremendous amount, he will and you're able to communicate it as you should, and you pick the subject matter. You can't teach him anything. People ask me when they start giving a class in Talmud to certain people who have very little background, which tractate should they choose? So I ask them, what is the profile of those people? And to different people, I say, you should study this tractate, that tractate, because that's going to touch them. Because when a person is impressed with, see, it's known the ultimate level of intellectualism is studying the Talmud. Talmud is, because there are no fallacies in the Talmud. So let's say I teach you something and you're not impressed. So what have I accomplished? So I have to communicate something within the Talmud, which will even touch the person who has that intellectual capacity to be touched. Once you're touched and the person realizes that we have something which is our heritage, which no one else has, now he understands, he'll study it. But he's not going to be, the level of commitment's not the same, because his approach now is intellectualism. So now you need the Musar to understand that the only way, the reason why this profound intellectualism was given to us is not just for the sake of intellectualism, it's for the sake of truth, but the only way you're able to be committed to that truth, you have to study Musar. Of course, you have to have an appreciation of who gave us that truth. That's the Musar. Understand who God is. Understand our shortcomings as human beings. So it's a combination of both, but you have to start. You can't start with the Musar. You can start with certain concepts, that there's a God, there's divine providence, but basically it falls on deaf ears. God doesn't, if your person believes in God. So you're able to clarify, but for the person to begin internalizing it, valuing it, that God is primary, key in his life, then you have to study with him. I'll give you an example. They say a person needs a rainmaker on Wall Street. And you tell them, you see, there's a person there, you think you're the rainmaker. This person will bring it down in torrents. That's what kind of rainmaker he is. Person says, you know something? I don't believe. And you meet the person and you take him out to dinner, this super rainmaker, and he talks about sports, he talks about everything else. He's a smart guy. So the one who's a succinct, successful Wall Street person says, he's a smart guy, but you know something? I wasn't impressed. Because which I value is what I'm talking about. I didn't see any of that. I said, you know something? Maybe you should discuss it with him. And the next meeting they meet, he presents a certain situation, and immediately he gives him a level of understanding how to invest the money, what to buy, when to sell, and how much, and what, and when, and where, and get on the board. He's like amazed. He's never seen this level of clarity, of insight, how he's able to succeed. Now you're talking his language. You have to talk his language to be impressed. So when you're dealing with a person who's secularly educated, went to an Ivy League school, and you talk to him about Musar, God, and that you know something, that stuff's archaic. That's something of the past. We're a progressive, we're broad, we're much broader than that. We're no longer we're no longer cave Jews. We've come out of the cave. So you have to share with him the intellectualism, the profoundness. Because whenever I teach, people like amazed. They say it's unbelievable. When you study the Talmud, there's no subject matter which is not discussed. Whether it's contracts, whether it's torts, whether it's marriage, whether it's medicine, whether it's botany, whether it's whatever, everything's discussed there. It's like amazing. A person who's a professional, he's a one niche person, whether it's medicine, whether it's finance, whatever it is. A person who's a Torah sage, a true Torah sage, he has the full gamut. We're not saying he doesn't have to have things filled in. He has to discuss with the doctor to understand what the medical issue is. But once he understands that, then with his Torah knowledge, he's able to put it in perspective to give you a ruling how to deal even with the medicine, how to deal with that issue. It's only because it's level of broad, because the Torah covers every single subject matter and has relevance to everything. That's impressive. And a person who truly has that knowledge. I once had there's a question, I had a retina problem. And there was a person up in Columbia Presbyterian. He was this person who was the expert. He even wrote a textbook on it. And he was very close with Rabbi Osband, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Riverdale Yeshiva. Riverdale is Yeshiva, tells. And this person was becoming a Baal Tshuva. At the time, he was a man in his mid-upper 40s, maybe 50. And usually you'd have to wait months to get an appointment with him. And Rabbi Osman's a good friend of mine. I said to him, could you call this doctor and get an appointment? He said, sure, I'll call him. I had an appointment the next day. I go to see him, and he attended Rabbi Osman's class. He gave classes for people who lived in Riverdale. And this doctor attended the class, and being Club Presbyterians not far from Riverdale, it was easy for him to come. So I go to him, and we begin talking. And the man, it's clear he's a genius. He's almost like an eccentric type of personality, genius. And he says to me, he says, I go to the Riverdale Yeshiva and I speak to the boys and I ask them about a certain topic, and I ask them, what's the page number in the Talmud to find, to source the material, the concept. And he says sometimes they can't tell me. They know it, but they don't know the location. He says, if you ask me any question in medicine regarding my field, I can even tell you what page it's on. I could almost quote you verbatim what's on the page. And they don't. Rabbi Osman, when he goes to this class, he has that proficiency. He tells them exactly. He's that expert. Therefore, he's impressed. With the students, he says, I'm impressed, but they should know. As I know my subject, they should know their subject matter. The point to prove that he was like this type of genius, he says to me, you have to excuse me, I have to go. This is where he says, I have to go urinate. I'll be back at 46 seconds. Yeah, with what he says to me, this guy. You understand? And if it takes you 2 minutes, it's okay. That's how specific and careful he's with his time. Everything was so focused. He had that level of focus. So if you deal with that kind of person, what's going to impress that person? Only thing to impress him, he has to somehow experience the profoundness of the intellectuals of Torah. You start with Musar, you understand you're not going anywhere with this man. Once he has an appreciate what it is, and this is God's wisdom, now we have to talk who's God. That's the Musar. Who's God and who are you not? Who you think you are. So to answer Larry's question, it's a combination of both. You can't only study, you have to have knowledge. And the teacher there has to be a balance. But the balance should be more knowledge and some Musar. Can't be all Musar. But again, there's certain points in the growth, sometimes you need a greater infusion of Musar than the knowledge. Or sometimes you have to study, he has to become more knowledgeable. Of course, he appreciates it, but now that he sees how weighty it is, he has to see its value. Therefore, you have to give him more knowledge to see the value of why he has to be more committed. You go to a nutritionist, the person makes an evaluation of what you need. Not everybody needs the same nutrition. There's a certain baseline, then there's others. You have deficiencies. The nutritionist suggests certain things because of those deficiencies. So the teacher has to make those evaluations. What exactly? There are no two people who are exactly the same. There is a format, and then there's the very individualized way to assist that person in his growth.